again looking at this, is this driven, and if it's not driven, how does this impact the change from a functional orientation to an emotional orientation, emotional need orientation for Chinese consumer?
Yeah, again, a very good question. I think particularly, I see a couple of trends around moving from kind of products to services, and you're absolutely right. What you're moving from is sort of more from a functional kind of sort of proposition into sort of lifestyle and kind of a loyalty, a brand loyalty. So there has to be a kind of an emotional connection, so I see that trend particularly dominant in the tier 1 and tier 2s at the moment, and I wouldn't suggest that should be tried at all in the lower tiers. Moment, it's far too soon. I think, like all things, there's a maturity cycle, and you can accelerate through that, but you can't bypass, you can't skip stages. So I would say, I was with a retailer this morning who has matured their proposition quite significantly, even in the tier 1 and tier 2s over the last 5 years, and it is very, very noticeable how they've done that. And it's not even the right thing to be putting the old proposition into the tier 3, tier 4, tier 5s. They have to adapt it some, but it can't go to the proposition they're currently working on for the tier 1s and tier 2s. So it provides complexity, no doubt about it. There's no one size fits all. There's no kind of sort of silver bullet solution. It requires a lot of careful work with regional sort of differences. But it's no different to any market in the world. But it just because of the scale and size, and I think people try and simplify it, and I think it's the wrong thing to do.
If we look at the emotional set of the Chinese consumers, which is prevalent now in the tier 1, maybe tier 2 cities, in how far is this the need for emotional satisfaction and maybe the flavor of these different from Western markets? Is it a different set or a different weight of emotions needed to be satisfied than in Western markets?
Yeah, I mean, I think you need to kind of break it down into what are the kind of the emotional drivers, and I think that in the context of today's kind of tough economic times, I mean, there's one set of very, very common characteristics, which is that people don't want to be too frivolous. They want to conserve their money and spend on the things that they only feel they get best value from. So in some respects, people are. I mean, I sort of see a couple of things happening around that. There are some brands, some retailer brands that people will revert to and trust and stay with on certain items, and then there are some sort of items which, in order to get better value, the consumer will be very, very promiscuous, as we call it, and have a very, very low emotional connection. They'll just be looking for the best deal. So I think it's quite different for certain categories. So again, food, people tend to stay quite loyal, particularly if the retailer is offering kind of good value, showing to demonstrate good value, as you say, the emotional connection is that they feel that they can kind of get all their that the brand represents their lifestyle and what they're trying to achieve. On certain other categories like kind of consumer electronics, it becomes very commoditized, very much around where you can get the best deal. So there's very little kind of emotional connection around that. So in the China market, I see a huge amount of activity around kind of fixing the brand and trying to create some loyalty. So I think that's going to be more prevalent. But again, when I compare it to other markets, they've made that emotional connection a lot quicker. So I think it's still felt that that the Chinese consumer is makes less of a kind of a sort of emotional connection and is still looking for the best deal.
As you mentioned online retail, you just said that at the moment the Chinese consumer is more oriented on the functional side. Does this give online to some degree an advantage? How do you picture online retailing in the future in China and their importance?
I think that's another really good question. I think it's got a tremendous future. I mean, I think I'll be honest. I didn't expect it to be as advanced as I've seen some of the recent data project. And my understanding was that the online business was a lot more immature than it actually is, and I'm quite astounded I mean, with online, it's, you know, one of the interesting things about online, obviously, is it's a very, very low cost model, and you know, you can kind of achieve you know, good economic kind of return on not much volume. But the thing about the Chinese market is you get access to this massive volume. So the big sort of challenge will clearly be whether the distribution network can keep up with the demand. So I think at the moment it's got a very great future, as it sort of, as I suppose most of the demand comes from the kind of tier 1, tier 2s, as the sort of more sophisticated internet users. It's going to have a massive challenge in the next phase as it disseminates wider to keep up with the distribution challenge. And as long as it does, it's going to overtake. Well, it won't overtake. It'll be. I mean, it's complementary, but it's certainly going to be one of the most significant markets, I think, globally, which is tremendously exciting.
Agree.
Yeah.
If we now zoom away from the online and look at local and foreign retailers, what is the balance right now? What is the balance in the future?
Mm-hmm.
Does China pride, national pride, play a crucial role in tilting this balance? Or not? Okay.
Again, you know, the international retailers. You know, the first few came into market about sort of 15 years ago, and if you look at the sort of trends since then, actually the networks have clearly grown on a lot of the international brands, but not as much as you'd expect, actually, if you were to kind of to look at the sort of sheer potential, and then the networks, and particularly compare those networks to other markets. And so I think what that tells you is that there's a lot of governmental intervention and protection. So there's a desire to modernise to a certain point, but never to really completely compete too effectively with the local Chinese retailers. I think we're at a really interesting point. There's clearly some very, very strong, thriving local retailers, and I think that particularly the kind of the entrance over the last few years, and will grow in the next few years, because China's such an attractive market in comparison to other international markets. I think we're going to get to a point where there's going to be a sort of there's going to tip the balance, and there's going to have to be a decision made about whether. I mean, I'll give you an example. There's a Nokia, which is known as famous for its consumer handsets, but it has a growing retailer presence. Has a store. I can't remember the city, somewhere in South China, and there are 6 copy stores. I mean, copy the merchandise and completely copy the store environment, absolute copies. And so the consumer is actually confused: which is the real Nokia store, which are the fake Nokia stores? You know, 5 others, and there's nothing they can do about it. There's nothing they can do about it whatsoever. I mean, there's a level of protection. It's a good sign. It's kind of Chinese entrepreneurism, but actually, what Nokia has to do is work harder at its store environment, its customer service, and to show that it's genuine in comparison to other stores. But whilst that practice continues, you're always going to get a challenge to kind of, you know, the kind of international retailers who want to really dominate. So I don't think they will ever completely tip over and dominate the local retailers. But I think it'll be a very, very interesting few years. It will be very, very interesting to see what happens. But it's not the same as, you know, the Indian market, for example, where there's absolute intervention stopping the international retailers, compromising any of the local retailers. That you've got sort of, I think we're 5-10 years away from even achieving any of the same penetration that we've achieved in China. So it's a good sign that the retailers are here and they're thriving. But, you know, as I said, I think we're going to get to a very interesting tipping point in the next few years.
Will we get to a point where local Chinese retailers will enter the foreign markets?
No, that's another really good question. I mean, you need to look at, I mean, you would have to say, of course, that would have to be the case. However, just following Chinese money going into international markets, I mean, there's huge activity at the moment with big Chinese conglomerates buying international businesses or you know, being present in international markets. So, you know, China is absolutely a financial powerhouse. However, you look at the Chinese brands, and I don't necessarily think that many of them travel particularly well. I don't think they've got strong enough propositions and strong enough brands actually. So I think that we need to. I wouldn't like to place any bets on who would succeed. I think they would certainly expand across the Asian region. I can see them going into neighbouring markets and elsewhere in Southeast Asia, or they cross over into the US and into Europe. Not for the next 5 years, I don't think, in any great sort of numbers and presence.
What you said, the weakness of the Chinese brand, that actually brings me to my last question, and that is maybe not a retail particular question, but plays a crucial role in retail. And I've asked this question before. Do you see Made in China becoming a premium brand in the future? The rise of Chinese brands, premiumization of Chinese brands, the value Made in China carries, will that change in the future?
Yeah, I think it will. I think it will, and I think for the very same reasons that once upon a time Made in Japan was a signal for poor quality and poor standards, and now clearly Made in Japan is a signal for quality. And I think that China is following the same evolution, and I think that there's been a positive trend in terms of increasing standards and quality in Chinese manufacturing, and by definition the fact that China is the world's manufacturer. I mean, there's almost few viable alternatives. So there's almost no choice in some cases. You're going to be getting. I mean, what I've seen is a big. I mean, because of the long lead times from sourcing from China, there's been a surge in terms of North Africa and Central Eastern Europe sourcing into Europe. So you see Romania and you see Morocco and you see Turkey coming up, and so I think that but in a grander scheme of things, actually there is no viable alternative. So I think there almost is Made in China or not made at all in some cases. So I think in terms of the premiumization, I think that's an interesting question. I think that we heard some very good a very good presentation yesterday from somebody who was driving kind of high-end, top-end Chinese brands. I think what we need to get to is with China sort of stands for something. And it has a very strong heritage in its arts and its history, but none of that's really emerging yet as a attached to any kind of premium or attached to any kind of brand really. And I think that's something that'd be very interesting to watch. There's certainly an opportunity, I think. So to answer your question in two parts, I think Made in China will definitely be perceived differently to today. Will it be attached to premiumisation? Possibly not, unless there will be another factor to be laid into that. And I think that will be attached to a certain, uniqueness around China, which is not evident at the moment.
Catherine, thank you very much.
Not at all. No, it was good fun.